káwa tó ṣeré o ká máa tí ì ṣe bàbá.
Ìgbà ló yẹ ká kọjú káwa tó ṣeré o ká mọ̀ tí ì ṣe bàbá o.
Ìbà ló yẹ ká kọjú káwa tó ṣeré o ká máa tí ì ṣe bàbá.
Ìgbà ló yẹ ká kọjú káwa tó ṣeré o ká mọ̀ tí ì ṣe bàbá o.
Ìbà ló yẹ ká kọjú káwa tó ṣeré o ká máa tí ì ṣe bàbá.
Ìgbà ló yẹ ká kọjú káwa tó ṣeré o ká mọ̀ tí ì ṣe bàbá o.
Olódùmarè
Ìbà ni mo ṣe,
Ifá
ìbà ni mo ṣe,
ẹlẹ́gbára
ìbà ni mo ṣe,
láàlú
ìbà ni mo ṣe,
òrìṣà ńlá
ìbà ni mo ṣe,
olúkòso
ìbà ni mo ṣe.
ọ̀sán yìí o.
Today we're going to go over Yorùbá Chronology. We're covering 2500 BC to the year 1840. Again, this information is coming from the book Yorùbá, A New History by Akinwumi Ogundiran. So walk with me here for a second. We're talking about the pre-archaic period of the Yorùbá history, 2500 BC to 300 BC. The Yoruba don't even have their name yet. So these are the proto-Yoruba people who evolved as a territorial language and cultural group around the Niger-Benue confluence. What is the Niger-Benue confluence? Where it's a conjunction of two rivers, the Niger River and the Benue River. In this space, many West African ethnic groups were created. Groups like the Ijumu, who were in northeastern Nigeria, the Igbo, which are in southeastern Nigeria, and of course the Yoruba, who we're talking today, which are in southwestern Nigeria. But at this time, they are better known as the Nok. The system known as Ifa, Afa, Fa, and its other derivatives were born in the Niger-Benue confluence. So let's move on to the Archaic period, which is 300 BC to 300 AD. This is when the people of this region experienced an intense era of drought. Southward migrations from the ancestral Yoruboid land, splitting into Proto-Yoruboid into three daughter language groups, which would be the Proto-Igala, the Proto-Itise-Kiri, and the Proto-Yoruboid by the AD 300. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about different groups migrating and splitting. The Igala, who are in central Nigeria. Now, according to their legend, they were founded by a hunter. He wanted that area because he thought it was ideal for hunting. The legend says that the hunter's camp became the original grounds for the Igala settlement, and his family carried on the lineage of that area. While this legend is not historical accurate according to academics, but the story represents an important aspect of Igala culture, especially in the importance of hunting. I mentioned in my last video that hunters are responsible for a lot of new settlements due to this exact same idea. Now, the other people that they mentioned, the word that I have trouble saying, the Itise-Kiri, they're found in the Delta State amongst the Edo and the Ondon. These people were primarily Ijebu, Yubo, Owo, and even some Igala and Ile-Ife people make up the Yoruba side of these people. Collectively, they are said to be known as the Olokumi people. We've heard this word before, those of us that are practitioners. These may have been the people of legend. And of course, you have the Yoruba, who are in southwestern Nigeria. Let's move on to the early formative period, 250 AD to 750 AD. This is when stable annual rainfall returned and rapid population growth and expansion proliferation of the Yoruba dialect started to branch. The emergence of a full-fledged house society, which we know as Ile or Ilu, it formalized with political institutions headed by a priest chieftain. This is what we know as the end of the Nok period and the rise of the Yoruba period. Remember, in my last video, I talked about the importance of rainfall. And as we can see, when the rain returned, the population growth and expansion spread it through the Yoruba people. A new day was born around this period. Let's move to the late formative period, 650 AD to 1050 AD. This is when social networks and regional trade intensified. Naturalistic sculptures, especially in stonework, developed representing ancestral figures, communal ancestors, cultural heroes, emergence of mega house polities characterized by large village complexes and incipient towns and embankments populated by corporate groups of diverse familiar backgrounds, federations of the mega houses polities headed by an elect titular leader likely proliferated, and the emergence of divine kingship institutions and ideology toward the end of that period. This is the common era for most people that are Yoruba. They identify with a lot of the things I just said. Communal ancestors, the compounds that they still live in today in Yoruba land, and the divine kingship. In Yoruba society and culture, the king is divine. The Oba is divine. We always say 400 plus one Orisha. Well, there's a saying that the one is always making room for a new king, and his connection to the divine, his connection to the Orisha, his connection to the Irumole, his connection to Olodumare. Let's move on to the classical period. We're talking about 1000 AD to 1420. Commercial and knowledge of capital revolution intensified in the region, and inter-regional trade, primarily glass production, began in Ile-Ife. And this intensified through the period. The major innovations in effective technology, especially in three-dimensional art, such as terracotta and later brass, emerged. The proliferation of the sprawling of urban policies, architectural features such as potsherd pavements were commonly regional. The royal divine kings became a preferred model of governance throughout the region. The codification of the Yoruba community of practice and networked regional systems, the major changes in worldview and cosmology, and the rise of the Ife Empire with a vast network of client states and colonies. The glass production leading to the elaborate beads that you see today, this is when it arose. The glass production was a game changer for Ile-Ife because they were now in a position of power to qualify other kingships by these beads. The Iyun beads, known by their bright red aesthetic, and the Shegi beads, known by their blue aesthetic, became qualifiers of kings who were on thrones. Their relation to Ile-Ife was vital for them to be recognized as legitimate. Ile-Ife became the major player during the classical era of Yoruba culture. Now let's move on to a period where I don't like so much, but we must talk about it. The intermediate period of 1400 AD to 1570s. Regional instability due to hemispherical ecological crisis and subcontinental political turbulence. A period of intense dry conditions characterized by a recurrent multi-year droughts collapsed the regional economy. External aggression by the Nupe militarists. Many prominent Yoruba polities collapsed. the end of the Ife political empire. Benin, a former client state of Ile Ife, established a political autonomy and embarked on its own expansion northward. Early stages of the Atlantic commercial exchanges began in the Bight of Benin with the arrival of the Portuguese traders, soon followed by the Dutch and the English. So let's break this down. The new pay militarists, we are talking about the Muslims. Nigerians influenced by Arabs began to wage jihad wars in Nigeria. This is the period of the War of Ara. If you remember, on this channel, I gave a presentation about the War of Ara and its social implications on the Yoruba community. We were not only fighting our brothers who have chosen Islam. This is the arrival of the Portuguese, the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, the beginning of doom for many African people. Let's go on to the Restoration period, 1570s to 1650, a period of renewal and regeneration marked by the rebuilding of the old kingdoms and foundation of new ones. A political landscape was transformed by the warrior kings and militaristic states such as Ilesha, Oyo, and Benin. The warrior king states were something that came out as a result of the wars that we fought with Muslims and the protection of wars we fought with Europeans. These warrior kings became Obas. They became rulers of these societies, and new kingdoms arose like Ilesha. Because of their bravery, they were rewarded with royalty. And this became the standard going forward, as people wanted their kings to be strong, intimidating, powerful. Let's go on to the last period we'll discuss today. The Atlantic period, 1630 to 1840. The era of merchant capital revolution and the Atlantic slave trade monetized economy took hold. Oyo became the dominant political power in the region. The proliferation of central policies and the frontier towns and market centers incorporated into an Atlantic economy with the new forms of global commodity exchange and consumption practices, intensification in everyday commodity production and craft specializations, cotton cultivation, cloth making, dye manufacture, expansion into itinerant trading. Social political instability began in the early 19th century, caused by the impacts of the transatlantic slave trade, inequality, elite factional conflicts, underclass rebellion, and jihad. So, not only are we dealing with the transatlantic slave trade and those social, economic, and social political implications, we're also dealing with jihad. We're fighting the Muslims again. Many different things are happening. Although we are advancing in cotton cultivation and cloth making and dye manufacture, we're infighting. Oyo took the position of power during this period, as I stated. This is the Woman King era. If you remember in the movie, Dahomey was fighting the powerful group from Oyo. This is during that period. 1630 to 1840. And from then, we come to today. What will be the new story of the Yoruba people? What will be the new story going forward from 1840 till now? What will we say? What will history say about 1840 until now? I guess we'll find out.